A Treatise of Satan's Temptations. Part 2. By Richard Gilpin. A Discourse of the Malice, Power, Cruelty and Diligence of Satan. Chapter 8, Part 1. Of Satan's Third Way to Hinder Peace, by Spiritual Sadness. Wherein, 1. Of the degrees of spiritual sadness. 2. Of the frequency of this trouble, evidenced several ways. Of the difference betwixt God and Satan, in wounding the conscience. 3. Of the solemn occasions of this trouble. 4. The engines by which Satan works spiritual sadness. 1. His sophistry. His topics enumerated and explained. 1. Scriptures perverted. 2. False notions. 3. Misrepresentations of God. 4. Sins, how he aggravates them. 5. Lessening their graces, how he doth that. 2. His second engine, fear, how he forwards his design that way. Besides the troubles already mentioned, under the heads of discomposures of spirit and affrightments, there is a third kind of trouble, which Satan gives to the children of God, and this may, for distinction's sake, be called spiritual sadness. These spiritual sadnesses are troubles raised in the mind, relating to the conscience and spiritual state or condition of men. They differ exceedingly from the two former sorts of trouble, for 1. These troubles wholly concern the conscience in point of regeneration, and men's suitableness thereunto. Whereas, simple discomposures of spirit firstly relate to outward things. 2. In these the conscience is immediately concerned, but in other troubles the conscience is either wholly untouched, or wounded only secondarily, by continuance and progress of the discomposure of the spirit. 3. In these troubles, conscience is the great instrument by which the devil works. Whereas, in the trouble of affrightments, the devil acted alone, the heart being in the meantime uncompliant and resisting. For the opening of this trouble I shall explain. 1. The several degrees thereof. It is a trouble of conscience, unduly aggravated by Satan, wherein he confines himself to the operations of conscience. But then, as he suggests the troubles of men by the voice of conscience, so he doth all he can to make it irregular in its actings, and excessive in that irregularity. So that in this case the conscience is evil, and employs itself in that mistake, to inquire into men's regeneracy or holiness, always being either a neuter or an adversary, and the devil helps this forward all he can. The Apostle, in Hebrews 10:22, makes mention of an evil conscience, and that chiefly as it doth occasion fear, hindering our comfortable access to God. This the conscience doth when it doth not execute its office aright, either in not excusing when it ought, or in accusing when it should not. And these false accusations cause different sorts of troubles, according to the variety of the matter for which it doth condemn. Hence is it that there are 3 degrees of trouble of conscience below the trouble of despair. 1. The lowest degree is when a regenerate person doth not positively determine the case of his soul, whether he be regenerate or not, but is only kept in suspense betwixt hope that he is, and fear that he is not, the conscience in the meantime, forbearing to witness for him, though it hath just cause to excuse him. This we may call a doubting or questioning conscience. And though it comes far short of these distresses, in which some men are plunged upon the account of their souls, yet is it a trouble, for their peace is hereby hindered and their desires of satisfaction frustrated, which in matters of so great concern, as are these of everlasting life and everlasting misery, must be very disquieting. When the affections are earnest, their satisfaction cannot be delayed without trouble. For hope deferred makes the heart sick, Proverbs 13:12. Not only doth it faint under its doubts, but is by that means so weak, in its purposes, that it is easily drawn to admit of greater inconveniences, which may lay the foundation of more perplexing disturbances. That the conscience may be in such a distemper that it will not witness for a man, when yet it cannot witness against him, is the observation of those that have treated of the nature of conscience. Sometimes it will not make application of God's promises. Though it will believe that he that forsakes sin is regenerate, that he that truly repents shall be pardoned, yet it will not affirm for a man that he forsakes sin or repents, though he really do so. Or if it cannot deny that, yet it will sometimes refuse to make that conclusion which one would think would follow of itself by natural consequence, and so refuseth to judge the person regenerate or pardon, though it cannot deny, but that he forsakes sin and repents. The greatness of the blessing, the remainders of unbelief, the deep sense of unworthiness, with other considerations, do keep off the heart from making, as I may say, so bold with the promises. But all this while the devil is doing his utmost to aggravate these considerations, affrighting the conscience from that just absolution, which it ought to give. 2. Another degree of trouble arising from an evil conscience, is when the condition of a regenerate person is determined by conscience, but falsely, to be very bad. I must here, as some others have done, for want of better terms, distinguish betwixt the state of regeneracy and a man's condition in that state, though the words state and condition are used promiscuously the one for another. A man may be in a regenerate state, and yet his condition in that state may be very bad and blameworthy, as not walking worthy of so holy a calling, as a person may be a man, and yet unhealthy or languishing. Thus many of the Asian churches were true churches, and yet in a bad condition, some lukewarm, some had an aim to live, and yet were comparatively dead, because their works were not full or perfect before God, and others had left their first love. To this purpose is that of the Apostle, 2 Corinthians 13:5, Know ye not your own selves, how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates. Epsilon mu tau iota delta kappa iota mu omicron sigma tau epsilon, where the word reprobate is not to be taken in the strict, severe sense for one not elected, but for one whose conversation is not so sound and approved as it should be. For this relates not to their being in Christ, but to their assurance of being in that state, which the Apostle affirms they might know, except the fault lay in their negligent, careless conversation. This kind of trouble then is of this nature: the conscience doth not accuse a man to be unregenerate, yet it condemns him for a carriage unsuitable to the gospel, and this sometimes when his actions are not absolutely evil, but partly good, partly bad. When the conscience condemns the actions as altogether sinful, because of some mixture of infirmities, in which case we should imitate the Apostle, in Romans 7, who when by reason of the remainders of sin in him, he could not do the good he would, that is, in such a manner and degree as he desired, nor avoid the evil which he would so clearly and fully as he wished, some imperfections in his best endeavors still cleaving to him. Yet his conscience took a right course, he was humbled for his imperfections, but withal acquits himself in point of integrity. His conscience testified, verse 16, that he consented to the law as good, and verse 22, that he delighted in the law of God, after the inward man. But in this case of spiritual trouble, the conscience takes all in the worst sense. It only fixeth upon the imperfections, and makes them to serve for proofs against the sincerity. Thus if a man in praying be troubled with wandering thoughts, then a distempered conscience condemns that prayer is a sinful profanation of the name of God. If the great concern of God's glory run along in such a way as is also advantageous to the person in outward things, then will such a conscience condemn the man for self-seeking, though his main design were truly the honor of God. In all actions where there is infirmity appearing with the most serious endeavors, or where God's glory and man's good are twisted together, the disordered conscience will be apt to take part with Satan, accusing and condemning the action. Yea, very often when the actions are very good, no way justly reprovable, the conscience shall condemn. If he have had peace, he shall be judged for security. If he have faith in God's promises, it will call it presumption. If he have a zeal for God, it will be misinterpreted for carnal rigor. If he have joy, it shall be misjudged to be natural cheerfulness or delusion. In a word, all his graces shall be esteemed no better than moral virtues. At this rate are the children of God put to great trouble, losing, as I may say, the things they have wrought, sadly bemoaning their hardness of heart, or want of faith and love, when in their carriage and complainings, they give very high proofs of all. In this also Satan is busy to nourish the conscience in its jealousies, and doth suggest many objections to confirm it in its distemper. Thanks.